Yeah, certainly can. My Twitter account or X account. I hate calling it Twitter now because Twitter was bad. X is really good. It's at Nation First AUST. So
you can actually see it scrolling across the bottom of the screen, George.
Very good. So it's there.
I put a little scrolling banner with the X accounts of each of us there. So you've got at Partisan Girl, at Father Dave, and then the more complicated one coming up here from George at Nation First.
Only one,
sorry, I've got two ats. Yeah, sorry. I'm going to connect that.
I'm not that powerful on X that I've got two ats. But, but I just got to say, while we're doing the Mutual Appreciation Society, of course, Father Dave knows how much I love him. But I've been following your X account for a long while, Syrian girl, and and I admire what you say. I see I got a bit of blowback actually promoting this on Facebook today, and immediately someone said, what are you doing? She's anti-Semitic and all of that. And it makes my head explode. I mean, just to be critical of Israel, and look, I'm going to put my cards out there. Some people don't know, but if they read what I've written and read between the lines, that they should know my position. I do not support anyone that's going to sit there and just bomb the hell out of people indiscriminately and have little children, babies, just slaughtered in the streets. I'm sorry, that does not make me a Hamas supporter. Does not make me a supporter of radical Islam. I mean, most people that know my history and my commentary know that I'm very much opposed to that. But what I'm also opposed to is war and indiscriminate killing.
Well, thank you so much for your bravery. I know that, for some people, they will see me as like a hot potato and they would maybe have not come here. But those people, again, they will respond to gatekeeping and intimidation. And a lot of the people that would like declare, even to, not only to yourself, but even some people on the left were told not to associate with me because of anti-Semitism. But this term is becoming like meaningless as it's being used on everybody and everywhere. It was even used on Jesus Christ, I think, recently. So, it was the Pope, wasn't it? It goes on and on.
Yeah.
So I appreciate
saying for Christians, even saying the words Christ is King is now apparently anti-Semitic. So, when it's gone that far, you're right. It is a term that's meaningless, and the conflagration of disliking Israel's actions, or even, to be quite honest, questioning whether Israel has the right to be a nation because of its history. And I don't. I think that reality is reality, and we've just got to get on with it. History is history. But nonetheless, those people who do question it are just simply shifted into the anti-Semitic camp, and it's very strange.
The funny thing is, even myself, being from the Levant, we're the people that are being assaulted by the genocide of Israel's existence. But even we are not allowed to say anything, right? That is, we have to be quiet about it. But and it's also this conflation of, if you're on the right, therefore you must support Israel. And Palestine is a left-wing issue, and all of this stuff that we're fed. And I think for some people, the most dangerous thing is that if conservatives realize that the word anti-Semitism thrown around is exactly the same as when you throw Islamophobia or hate or anything to shut down discussion. So we saw the new hate laws coming out, trying to suppress free speech. Who was behind that? I mean, Sky News, and I forget her name. She's an Israel First presenter. I forget her name. But Shari, that's her name, Shari. She was a major advocate of the hate speech laws, and they were coming a lot from the Zionist lobby. So, it's funny that for some on the right, they are pro-free speech. They're, for questioning certain religious teachings. But if it comes to Israel, that's it. They become left-wing. They actually become woke. So it's very, it's exactly that. They want to suppress
The flip side of that is also true. The flip side of that is also true because Candace Owens has put out that clip of herself saying she's been awarded Anti-Semite of the Year. I mean, when Candace Owens is being accused of being an anti-Semite, we know something's desperately wrong, I think.
Well, she was banned from coming to Australia by the Zionist lobby, and people tried
that is extraordinary. That is extraordinary.
Yeah, so they have that much pull and sway in this country. But I mean, George, you've always been outspoken. You've always, I mean, this is true to you, who you are. I suppose you're not going to be. I appreciate that. I'm honored to follow you and to have you follow me as a result of that.
Yeah, no, I must say too, George, in promoting this webinar, the only negative feedback I got was against you, not against Mimi.
There you go.
He said he's a racist and a bigot. I said he's also a good friend of mine.
Everyone's a critic. They just won't let us be.
Hang a second. I've just got to go and get the whiteboard. No, I don't have one.
That'll be my face. It's already pretty white today.
A question here from Father Mark. Can the panel, Tony, tell us why the international community is so against the previous regime when it clearly has caused so much heartache to our guests?
I think she means Syria. Or sorry, he means Syria.
Yeah, so he means, I think he means, why was the government of Bashar al-Assad so despised by the international community? I think you're in a good position to comment on that, Mimi.
If I may, it's very simple. Israel didn't like the previous government. That's it. That's all it is.
It wasn't just Israel, was it? Qatar didn't like it.
Why didn't they like it?
Why didn't they like it?
Why didn't they like it? Yeah.
Because several reasons. Okay, and Qatar as well, but they have a U.S. military base. There's a lot of reasons. I'm gonna break them down. Points. Number one, Syria is a target in and of itself, right? It's not so much who controls Syria, but Syria itself is the target, because the Zionist project of Greater Israel believes that everything belongs to Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates. So if you see what's happened in Syria, as soon as this previous government fell, Israel began its invasion. So
well, more than that, can I just say, and you might clarify this.
Sure.
So I don't pretend to be an expert on Syria and Syrian geopolitics or anything around it, but what I noticed was, here's this government run by Islamists, the former Al-Qaeda, and they released their first map of the new Syria. And surprise, surprise for Islamists who would normally be completely and utterly opposed to Israel and its actions, their map excluded that part that Israel had just taken control of, almost as if they were saying, yes, we support Israel taking that bit of land. I thought that was quite bizarre and not just a coincidence.
If you, maybe later I will send you some things, George, but it gets even crazier than that, because on multiple occasions, Israeli ministers have said they prefer ISIS to win in Syria. Israel has admitted to giving Al-Qaeda specifically medical aid on the Syrian border. Netanyahu even shook their hands. They've been photographed like with Al-Qaeda on the Golan Heights border. Al-Qaeda was called Al-Nusra Front. And they've been very open about the fact, even in the Hillary Clinton leaked emails, they was very detailed, like Al-Qaeda, Jake Sullivan told her Al-Qaeda is on our side, and Al-Qaeda is basically essential to break up the resistance axis, or like any kind of resistance to Israel. So one thing is, Syria is the target. It's about destroying Syria's defensive capabilities. The first thing that Israelis did when they took over the Golan, by the way, is to destroy the cross on top of the Mount Hermon. It's a very ancient church, very ancient cross, the first thing that they did. And so I think Christianity in the region is also a target. If they wanted to basically ethnically cleanse what's Syria's Christian population, they would support Al-Qaeda being in there. And Christians in the Middle East are inconvenient to Israel, because they might cause sympathy from the West, because they're neither Muslim nor Jewish, they're Christian. Thirdly, Syria itself was supporting like any resistance group that was fighting Israel. Fourthly, Syria didn't have any, welcome back, Father Dave, just getting into the points of why they wanted to get rid of the Syrian government. Fourthly, the Syrian government banned all GMOs. They were against like Monsanto. Fifthly, they weren't connected to the central bank. They had their own banking systems. Sixth, they didn't
Like
have any
Libya, Iraq.
exactly, yes, they didn't have any IMF debt. So all of the above reasons and probably more. But the objective is to weaken Syria, get rid of its weapons of mass destruction, so it wouldn't have an answer to Israel's nukes, and then balkanize Syria. And Al Qaeda is like the perfect, is the perfect. Sorry, try not to get so many DMs. Um, so I don't know how to silence these things, but yes, essentially, Al Qaeda is the perfect vehicle to achieve all of these objectives. And even the governor of Damascus recently said, like, Israel has nothing to fear from us. And this is the new governor that Jolani put into place.
So Israel's got nothing to fear from former Al Qaeda operatives that are now in charge of Syria. It's very bizarre. It almost seems like partnership, and you know, I don't know. I mean, look, I understand it. I get it. I get what's going on, and I get your analysis of it. I think it probably sounds like the reality. And it's interesting that all of this happened at a time when Russia's very, well, I mean, it has been for years, obviously now, very busy with its own conflicts in Eastern Europe. It happened because at any other time, you may have found Russia would have assisted the Assad government there to actually stop anything like this. Because Russia's defence and military is focused in Eastern Europe, which has come at that perfect time. But it came so swiftly and quickly. I mean, it almost came by surprise to many, including, it appears, Assad himself, the fall of this regime. You know much more about this than I do. What is the reason that it all collapsed so quickly? I'm guessing CIA involvement, US deep state military involvement, and a whole host of other things, including probably Israel and Mossad.
You know, I think the shocking part is that what they did is, even to us, still trying to figure it out, right? Like, they did this thing so swiftly, and we're still here trying to figure it out. But I come to some understanding of what's happened. First thing you said is perfectly right. Like, Russia was pulled into the war in Ukraine. The Rand paper came out and said this is about overextending Russia. And that was in 2014, the Maidan thing started. But even like after that, I think that the intention was to weaken Russia's position in Syria. It's probably part of the reason the Ukraine happened in the first place. Secondly, Turkey, kind of, because of the war in Ukraine, Turkey had a lot of influence. If they were to shut the Bosphorus, for example, this would have been difficult for Russia going forward. So yeah, its position was weaker. But I heard also that there was a communications issue. Like, people were getting orders to go forward. The Syrian army were giving orders, contradictory orders, some to move forward and some to retreat. So it caused chaos and confusion. I think it must have been like a combination of maybe Mossad, as you said, infiltrating communications, or it could have been some kind of treason, because what you have to know also is that Syria was under sanctions for like over a decade, and for 4 years they were the worst sanctions ever. This was before Idlib offensive, which everybody agreed, like, Al Qaeda controlled Idlib, and so they were all kind of contained in this area. But the US and Israel and everybody was the EU. They wouldn't let the Syrian military and Russia clean that out, and eventually the country just became weaker and weaker and weaker until it collapsed internally. And I think I want you guys to note something important. It happened within days of the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, and that tells you that it's coordinated with Israel. And the country that's coordinating with Israel is Turkey, because these guys were all supported by Turkey and pushed down into Syria. So it just so happens that the Israelis stop one front and then they immediately start one front in Syria. It's not a coincidence.
Well, we noticed that map that came out from the government shortly after that too, which had a map of Syria that didn't include the Golan Heights and didn't include the area occupied by Turkey. So that made it reasonably obvious how the deal had been done.
Precisely. There's one thing I want to tell your audience, especially for followers of George. Basically, what you have to understand is Al-Qaeda justifies Israel's existence because Israel is essentially the Jewish state in the Levant, like ISIS is the Islamic state in the Levant. They kind of have the same thing. They believe in this messianic prophecy that if they take over Syria, then the Messiah will return, or in the case of the Zionists, that he will, come for the first coming. And they believe that this land belongs to them because God gave it to them, the same way that ISIS believes that. They come from all over the world, like Africa, the Middle East, Asia, India, into Syria, the same way that ISIS came from all over the world. Not to mention Europe, of course. But this is like the very first terrorist organizations in the world were actually Zionist organizations, Ergon, Haganah, and Lehi. And they were they put a letter bomb for Will Truman, and Churchill as well was getting letter bombs from them. So they conducted many terrorist attacks, including on British targets in Palestine. That's how their state was created. So of course,
it's definitely history. It's 100%. You can read that. I just noticed that in the comments here, and I only just had a look at it. And then there's a few people earlier on when we were talking about Israel that were, giving it to me a little bit, just saying, "Oh, do you support Hamas?" I mean, it was clear. I do not support Hamas. I do not support radical Islam. I do not support terrorism. But isn't it funny how
Israel does support radical.
Isn't it interesting how there is just such a black and white or polarized view on this? If you are critical of Israel, therefore, ipso facto, you must support Hamas. I mean, look, let me be clear. Their kidnapping and that day that in October a few years ago when they came in and did everything they did, it was abhorrent. It was abhorrent. I got to say, and this is getting into dangerous ground, I've got my suspicions about how a bunch of yahoos in really subpar vehicles, hang gliders or whatever that we heard, were able to sneak up on the military there, which has one of the greatest intelligence agencies in the world, how they were able to traverse areas that were several football fields in length of just desert in front of a military base and take over a military base is beyond me, but that's what happened. Nonetheless, everything they did, regardless of what you might think about all of that strangeness, was wrong, was evil. But likewise, indiscriminately bombing people is evil. And they say, oh, but they're human shields. Okay, let me just give you an analogy of the human shield argument. So when bank robbers go in and rob a bank, and then they hold women and children in front of themselves as they walk out of that bank, is it okay for the police to start firing at the people they're holding? Because, hey, they're human shields. It's not. So this is no argument. It is no argument. And, the next person that says that to me, I'm going to say that straight to them. Will you support the police shooting innocent people because the bank robber's holding them hostage? I mean, that's essentially what you're talking about. I couldn't care less whether they're human shields. They're humans and they're innocents. And, if you just look at some of that footage, of these mothers and fathers just wailing over a 2-year-old that's just been blown to bits, and how you can then go from that to say, oh, well, I still support this action. I mean, you're you're on a different plane of existence to me, because I just
Yeah.
can't. And anyway, what I want to get to is the plight of Christians in Syria, rather than responding to what people, claiming that I'm pro Hamas or whatever. So this is even contested, and I'm finding this very interesting. I put a post up on Twitter some time ago, put a whole heap of proof points on that, on X I should say. I put a whole heap of proof points up on that, including an article by Newsweek where they were, it showed that there was definitely attacks on Christians that happened. Yes, admittedly, at the same time there was attacks on the Alawites. I think that's how you say the name, the Alawites, which are a Muslim sort of sect that believes something a bit different to most mainstream Muslims, from what I understand. And the Alawites were known for supporting Assad. And my understanding too is that many Syrian Christians actually supported Assad too, which is why I think that they are now being targeted. And why did they support him? Well, because he protected them. He tried to keep things as secular as possible internally, so that Christians were not targeted by radical Islamists. So have I got that right, or is there something else that is currently going on? And is the intel that you've got that there are attacks on
petition up
Christians
on
now?
the screen? I've got your petition up on the screen there, George.
Well, people can go to the organisation I work for, citizengo.org, and sign that petition to protect persecuted Christians in Syria. That was a petition going to the UN rapporteur on religious freedom, I believe, or religious discrimination, and we're wanting, we're wanting to make that big. But anyway, I'd be interested to know what you know about all of this, Mimi, because, as I said, there's reports now that, oh no, it's not that bad against the Syrian Christians. They're not really being targeted. There was even some commentary from mainstream Christian leaders within the region that saying that they weren't being targeted. And I wonder whether that's because if they don't say that, they better watch out.
I believe that the leader you're speaking of was a guy in Lebanon. I don't think he even had anything to do with Syria. But yeah, like, you can get anyone to say anything. Here's the thing: the people of the coast were being targeted, which is mostly Alawites. There are also a lot of Christians there. In fact, Syrian Christians are all over the country, but there are a lot in the coast. And statistically, there were Alawites were the ones who were mostly targeted. Christians were also targeted, but even Sunni Muslims, which is like the majority sect, that were trying to save any Alawites or Christians, were also killed. And these were massacres that were happening across the coast. And the question is, like, they're massacring minorities, which includes Christians. But if it's not majority Christian, does that mean we're not supposed to care that they're killing innocent civilians? That is the question I would pose to those people. Are you trying to say that only Christian lives matter, or do children's lives matter, no matter what religion they are? So I wanted to. So that's
I found that very funny. No mention of the Alawites that are being slaughtered. I mean, I shouldn't find it funny. I don't find it funny. It's actually horrific. But
I think it's important.
That was a response.
Important to realise, though, that the Christian community was enormously supportive of the previous government. I remember being in Sednaya, which is infamous for the prison, of course, but Sednaya is the ancient Christian community, along with Malula, the only place in the world where Aramaic is still spoken, the language of Jesus. So, and I remember being in Sednaya, and we were holding a service there in a cathedral with the bishop and the local sheikh up the front, giving out gifts to the families who've just had children killed. And there were dozens of them. And this is just in the last couple of months. So in other words, the recruitment rate of Christians into the Syrian army was enormous. And so they were very loyal to the previous government. And I assume basically they're very concerned to stop happening what is happening right now.
So I'm looking at the comments, and there's one from the infamous Mark Rowley, who is going around
Yes,
the freedom movement trying to get people to vote for the liberals. Okay, that's like Mark Rowley's entire shtick now, is to try to like push people from the freedom movement into voting for like Voldemort, i.e. the liberals guy. The same liberal party that's crushing free speech right now, the Liberal Party, where that COVID was under the Liberals, actually, that's when it happened, it was the Liberals that were in charge. And also, you know, like he's also pushing for The Voice again. This guy, what's his name? I've been calling him Voldemort so much. Like, Dutton. Dutton. So just like I would take people like Mark Rowley and the guy behind Freedom Media, whose name I now forget, but he obviously has connections to the mainstream media because this guy, I forget his name, he actually took a photo of me at a free speech event in Perth, which happened to be held by, again, the Liberal Party. And he somehow got the Australian news to report on it. Like me attending a public meeting became national news because this guy, Freedom Media, who used to be a police officer, by the way, happened to have these connections. And they're the ones that are trolling in the chat. So I think that they're an isolated voice, they're a lone voice, and they're the ones that are insistent upon Hamas.
I've got no issue with Mark exercising his free speech there.
Absolutely.
No issue with
Could I say just one thing quietly? I mean, Mark,
Sure.
You're obviously listening. You're obviously watching. I mean, here it is, because it said that we're not saying anything about Nigeria, Sudan, Egypt. I say it all the time. Look at my history in Parliament. The attacks that I made on radical Islamist regimes right throughout the world. And, you know, I even had a website up, stopthepersecution.com, which talked about a lot of these attacks. In fact, at one stage there, I was in talks with an Anglican bishop about going over to the Sudan to actually do some work. So, you know, I won't cop a criticism that, you know, I'm only saying this because of, you know, Israel. That's not it at all. I've been concerned about the plight of Syrian Christians. And look, Israel, I think, had a very big thing, a big hand in what happened there in Syria. But we've got to say right now, it is radical Islamists that are being the ones who are targeting.
There are two sides of the same coin. Here's the key, guys. They're two sides of the same coin. They're both terrorists, okay? Just because you oppose like Al-Qaeda does not mean you should support Israel. You should be opposed to both of them. Like 10 years ago when I was on the Inside, or maybe it was 12 years ago, or when I was on the Inside program, I said like the US is doing what it did in Afghanistan. They're like promoting basically Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria. This was at the time when nobody even acknowledged that Al-Qaeda was in Syria. And I was proved correct. And I was talking about it before like Mark Rowley and Freedom Media even knew that Syria existed. But you see, when you talk about the fact that, for example, Israel bombed the oldest church in Gaza, and when they took over the Golan Heights of Syria, they pushed out like a majority Christian population. The Golan Heights was over 12% or more Christian. They burned churches. They burned them on Christmas. They bombed Syria every Christmas Eve. You're not allowed to say that, because what about Nigeria? Like, I'm sorry. I don't know anything about what's happening in Nigeria because I'm from Syria, but I can talk about Syria stuff because I was born there. But what the point is, what they want to do is they want to deflect, because they're getting money from Zionist organizations, or they themselves are either brainwashed or they happen to be of that group, of that let's say religion or affliction. So unfortunately, they're loud, but they're just two of them, and they are a minority. And the question about like Hamas that they try to throw at people. I posted you, Father Dave, a message that I have here from a former. Please check your messages. It's from the Times of Israel. Okay, For like Al-Qaeda leader in Syria welcomes Israeli airstrikes. This was dated 2018. So next time someone supports Israel, we perhaps should ask them, do you support Al-Qaeda? Because Al-Qaeda likes Israel and Israel likes Al-Qaeda.
Yeah,
Check
if
the
you can
headline.
send it to me, if you can send that to me the WhatsApp, I can put it up on the screen, but I can't do a text
Sure.
message.
I found it very interesting during the initial attacks on Gaza, where you had the Latin Patriarch, you know, the Western Catholic bishop in that area, coming out and clearly saying what had happened, the attacks on churches, how there were women that were killed by snipers as they were entering Christian churches, a whole heap of things, and the initial denial by Israel, which then turned around to, yeah, okay, we did that. You would tell that to people, and I was showing it to a particular friend of mine, and he just would not believe it. And he actually even sent a message online to the Latin Patriarch saying, "Why are you lying?" I mean, it was like there's this brain fog that you cannot penetrate because, no, this is just black and white. Israel's always good, and anyone that's against him is always bad. And anyone that says anything against Israel is always bad. I mean, I can't understand that dichotomic thinking, that black and white thinking on this, because it almost is the same to me as what Tony Abbott once said about Syria. And he said, you know, people want to see this black and white, it's goodies and baddies. His view was, well, actually, you know, it can be baddies and baddies. And I think that's what he said. And there is a lot of that. There's no side that's all good. And there's no side that's all bad. But I've got to tell you that the Al-Qaeda mob that's currently in charge, to me, is proving to be near all bad.
Yeah, I'm going to say these guys we got on the screen at the moment. That's the article, Mimi, yes?
Yes, absolutely. Correct. And people, you know, they don't really pay attention to this because unfortunately our media, as we learned from COVID, is controlled. I mean, Shari, like this woman that works for Sky News, who's an Israel firster, she was all for the vaccine. She was all for imprisoning people if they didn't take the vaccine. I mean, as far as I remember, perhaps I'm mistaken about that last part, but she was definitely, you know, pro the lockdowns. So the fact of the matter is, why are we still listening to these people? It's Rupert Murdoch. They control our media and they're selling Israel, Israel, Israel. I went to the Australian and every single headline was about Israel. And they, unfortunately, like they have hijacked the right of this country and they're selling the idea of Israel as this like moderate, democratic, European-esque country in the Middle East. But when you know what it actually is, it's a country full of illegal immigrants and terrorists. That's what it is. That's how it was created. Like millions of illegal immigrants and terrorists have literally entered Syria and Palestine. And they've unfortunately, like that's how it began. It was also refugees from World War II. So let's just be clear. Also refugees from World War II. But even before World War II, and in the 80s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that's when all of the illegal immigration came into the Levant. And what they've essentially done is they've replaced our people through ethnic cleansing, through genocide. You know, their history of terrorism is well known. You can look it up. And for people who are conservative, who understand the value of, you know, your history, your people, your ethnicity, to support a nation created by illegal mass immigration because of a psychotic version of an extremist religion, what does that sound like? It sounds just like supporting ISIS. So I apologize, but I mean, look, this might make people a little bit uncomfortable, but I can say this because I am Syrian. I am one of the people that's been pushed out of their land because of the creation of Israel. So, you know, I just find it's sad, really, that they've been captured in this way because a lot of people forget, like they forget what people like Shari were pushing during the pandemic, what the mainstream media was pushing, and they have to be careful. They can't listen to it, especially when it comes to Israel. And I'm telling you, like, I know Syrian Christians, I know Alawites. Ask them yourself. Like, for 14 years, the Syrian state was fighting people that were supported by Hillary Clinton, by Obama, and now we have the former head of Al Qaeda and a former member of ISIS as the president. And Israel, the first thing that Netanyahu did was to congratulate Syria on this and take credit for it. He went up and he said, "We did this, Israel. I was behind this." So Christians are dying now as a direct result of Netanyahu, and it's been happening since 1948. So don't you pretend to care about Christians if you support Israel. Don't.
Yeah, having been to Israel a number of times to do pilgrimages, I can attest to you that the populace there is not very Christian friendly. The first time, you may know this priest there, Father Dave. He now is the bishop. I'm just trying to remember his name. I think it's Hossam. Anyway, he's a Palestinian Christian, and he's now the Bishop of Jerusalem. And when he was the priest, the dean of the cathedral there, we had our traditional, it was during Easter, and we had the traditional washing of the feet ceremony for Maundy Thursday. And then we left from St. George's Cathedral in Jerusalem to walk up as a congregation up to the Garden of Gethsemane, and it was such a moving thing. We actually carried a cross and walked up to the Garden of Gethsemane, and the number of times that we were spat at, it was just unbelievable. And I thought, wow, this is an eye-opener. And of course, most of those Anglicans there were probably uber liberal. Most of them were, some of them were English and, very effete and meek and mild and not wanting to get into any confrontation, so they just lumped it. The next time I was there was in Orthodox Holy Week, quite a number of years later, and I was standing with a bunch of Serbs, and they were all holding crucifixes, and the same thing happened. And I got to tell you that the reaction from the Serbs was anything but mild and meek. I thought, holy moly, we're about to see a rumble here. So, but I can tell you, I've witnessed that. There is definitely an anti-Christian sentiment within Israel. And if you think otherwise, my challenge is you is to visit there with any Christian insignia on you, and you will find out.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Go ahead, Father Dave, sorry.
Because I had the privilege of hosting two of the Anglican bishops of Jerusalem when I was parish priest in Dulwich Hill, and I continue to maintain a good relationship with Bishop of Ria Rabo Al-Asl, who's a Palestinian former Bishop of Jerusalem, great man. I was only there the once, which was when my friend Mordechai Vanunu was released. But one of my lasting memories from there was having morning tea at the church at St. George's, which you mentioned, and a guy saying to me over morning tea, saying, you know that part in the Bible where it talks about how the Spirit of God got up and left Jerusalem? And I said, yeah, it's Book of Ezekiel. He said, it's a lot like that here, isn't it? That was my experience of my one and only trip. It was a lot like that. And this, I got strip searched and harassed and all sorts of things getting out of there. And I remember the bishop saying, oh, that happens to me every time. And he said, because it's below my dignity to undress in front of a young man. So I say to them, if you want to undress me, you're going to have to do it yourself. And he then has this very embarrassed young man taking his clothes off to strip search him, but it's a regular routine, even for someone of that prominence within the Christian community, at that level of harassment. So it's tough, but the fight goes on.
And here's the thing. I think the other day you told me that they almost beat you to death in Israel when you went there.
Sorry?
I remember you telling me a story that you were almost beaten to death in Israel.
Oh, yeah, I was almost killed there, in a riot. That was outside of the prison, Ashkelon prison, after my friend Morty was released. It was, I was surrounded by settlers and I thought I was being beaten to death, but somehow I survived.
Those
I'm
settlers
still
are
here.
like the settlers are basically, the claim is that the Israelis are afraid of Palestinians, but somehow they inject themselves deep into Palestinian lands and live on illegal settlements in the West Bank, and they're all armed to the teeth. So how is that fair? But about the Christians, I will say, like, when it comes to Christian Syrians, specifically, I think you're going to find that even like all Syrians right now are scared. And I'm sure you know this, Father Dave, because you know people specifically, like our friend, which I don't want to cause any issues for, but Sheikh Hassoun, for example, who was a very, he's a sheikh that was basically like the religious leader in Syria, and he always preached like love and peace for all religions. And they're like slapping him around now in Syria, and he's completely tried to flip the, like, what he's basically afraid to say that his true opinions about the new regime. And he's unfortunately, a lot of people are going to say anything to try to save themselves. People, I mean, even in my own family, people are like saying, well, now, it's going to be even more dangerous to say what you want to say, because there's the former head of Al Qaeda is in charge, and the U.S. and Israel is responsible for that. I mean, Netanyahu literally took credit for that, and people like they'll call you anti-Semite, they'll say you support Hamas, but they'll never call you a liar.
I pray for Sheikh Hassoun every day. He's one of the greatest men I've ever met, possibly the greatest man I've ever met, and just a beautifully inclusive, loving, caring man who, I always remember when I asked him how many Christians there were in Syria, and he said, 23 million. I said, well, hang on, how many Muslims are there in Syria? He said, 23 million. We don't discriminate. He says, I'm the sheikh for the Sunni, the Shia, the Christians, the Jews, the atheists too, if they'll have me. He had a truly inclusive view of the Syrian community, which is why I think he played such an important role holding things together for as long as he did. But I don't want to say more. I don't want to see him further targeted.
I just want to say also that it's not just about religion, it's about ethnicity. And they're killing us for our land. They're killing us not because, well, I think that Israel specifically hates Christians from the Middle East, like specifically Orthodox Christians, because of the history there, okay? And some religious animosity they have because of that. But I think also it's just about exterminating all of us equally, right? And taking over our land. Like it's more of a target of the Levant people and our culture and our history. And it's coming from multiple directions. But I do want to put up some stuff, Father Dave. I'm going to let you guys discuss for a minute. Stuff to put up on the screen if you can. But George, I just, about Tony Abbott, like saying both sides are the baddies. It's interesting, but, like surely one side was worse than the other. Like, for example, right now.
Oh, yes. I don't think he was saying that they weren't. I think that his point was, and he got castigated for even saying that, actually. I think his point was, it's complex.
Yes.
This is not black and white.
Yes, that's very important.
Did you guys know that the current Prime Minister of Australia campaigned to the Syrian community in Sydney as being against the regime change?
Sorry?
I did not know that.
There's recordings of it.
You're saying
recordings of Anthony Albanese telling the Syrian community that he was opposed to Assad being ousted. That's very interesting. It'd be interesting
look, Anthony's a friend of mine, and I'm not suggesting for a moment he confides in me or that we agree on everything, but I believe he's a man of integrity, and I sat down with him many times talking about Syria with him, and he's very aware. He's no fool.
I think he is.
Likewise, actually, I mean, stuff's been said about Peter Dutton. Peter Dutton actually is a friend of mine. I consider him. He is
Gosh,
extremely.
okay.
He is
I
extremely.
find it hard to come to terms with George.
I know. Well, look, and I like him personally, but he's extremely one-sided and just got one point of view on the Israel issue, and that's as far as I'm concerned, unfortunately.
There's a Christian Palestinian man that I know that perhaps he should meet, and he's a member of the Liberal Party. In fact, perhaps we will discuss this later, because obviously he's a little bit captured, but perhaps he's be open to a second opinion.
Yeah, that would be very interesting.
Yes, great.
I'm going to say that I'm no longer associated with the Liberal National Party. I don't have membership there, and so the gates aren't as open for me as they once were.
No, I know this. Unfortunate, perhaps, and you where you'll be in a better position in future. I believe there's a growing awareness now. The internet in our generation, the mainstream media no longer has a stranglehold on the narratives, and people can see things from both sides.
Now, look, guys, we're getting close to. We said we're going for an hour. We've got 8 minutes to go, I think, according to my clock. Just focusing on the issue which we wanted to focus on today, namely the plight of Alawites, Christians, minority groups in Syria. I mean, Mimi, you're more in touch than George and myself. I mean, what is the situation today? What is the prospect for these dear people moving forward?
So essentially what happened was there was a little section of Syria called Idlib province, and for 4 years, every terrorist from all over the world, Uzbeks, Uyghurs, Turkmens, you name it, they descended upon this place and joined Al-Qaeda. And when December 8th happened, and the Syrian government began to fall, the gates were opened and those people were flooded all over Syria. And it took about a few months, but they started slaughtering minorities, specifically the Alawites of the coast. They would basically, I've got a video of them literally handing out guns to these people, and on the street, like candy. And then they're chanting that we're coming to the coast, we're going to kill Alawites and Christians. And they basically went into people's homes, and this video is all over Twitter. You won't see them on the mainstream media, but they're just randomly shooting people in their homes, and they're making them crawl on the floor and bark like dogs. And Netanyahu, lest we forget, took credit for what happened in Syria. He went on national television and he said, I am responsible for what happened in Syria. So we will hold him responsible for arming. Literally, Israel said they armed 12 Syrian rebel groups. He literally, coordinated this because it was right after the ceasefire in Lebanon. And it is because they wanted to cut off supply lines to the resistance in Lebanon, which the Syrian government was doing. They were allowing weapons to go into Lebanon. So essentially, they supported Al-Qaeda for this purpose. And Syrian Christians, we're still in Syria. They're still suffering under the consequences. And I have a great video of them coming out with a giant cross and saying, we're Syrian and this is our land. And we're not going to be replaced by a bunch of Central Asian terrorists that are trying to force their version of Islam on us. And we would like to shine a light on what's happening and expose the masterminds as well as the perpetrators. And just don't forget about us. That's, I think, what we hope to achieve here is for people just don't, now that Syria has been defeated, now that the regime change has been achieved, don't forget about us, because we're going to be a lesson for what the regime change means. And thank you again. I really appreciate your support.
Where's the hope, Mimi? Where's the hope for Syria now, do you see?
Well, it's an ancient civilizations. Yeah. It's civilization, and as I think Oscar Wilde said, it measures time by the rise and fall of empires. So I think that the hope is that we just outlast them.
Yes, it's an anvil upon which many a hammer has been broken.
Absolutely. And I mean, look, I hope it happens in my lifetime. That's all I have to say.
Would you, I mean, unless there's anything further to add, we're going to run up against the deadline very soon. Perhaps you could say a prayer for those in Syria that are under attack, Father Dave.
Yeah, brother, why don't you lead us in prayer, Father? I think that would be great.
Okay. People might not know that I'm actually an ordained minister within the Anglican Catholic Church.
Yep, so I didn't know if you wanted me to mention it, but Father George.
Out of me that. But I will, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. God, we beseech you to protect the Christians and other minorities and all the people that are actually in Syria and the Levant, who are under attack, who are under persecution, who are scared, who are terrified for their lives. Lord Father, protect each and every one of those families that this very day, this very night, may be threatened, may have their lives threatened, may have their safety threatened. And Lord God, we ask that you claim the souls of those who have already come to have died in attacks on them because of their faith. We ask all of this in the name of Jesus Christ, your Son and our Saviour. Amen.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, Father. Thank you, sister. Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to answer all the questions, and I haven't been active in putting them all up on the screen, but we've had plenty of people sharing some good stuff, which will remain there on the line, whether you're on in the archive, as this will be archived on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and a few other places as well. So
we've had a good outing here, and there's been some debate and disagreement in the chat, and that's fine. People are happy to. Actually, one of the things that I've got to say is that before we close, I am never ever going to be someone that attacks peaceful protesters after what happened during the COVID years, when people were fired upon for simply peacefully protesting. I don't like it when it's violent. I don't like it when there's people being targeted, or when, say, there's something illegal like blocking roads illegally, or I've seen instances where people's properties are targeted. I think that's wrong, and it's a different form of protest. It sort of strays from the peaceful to the more violent. One of the things that actually I do think, and I know we might have a bit of a disagreement on this, Maren, is that we can talk about this, because I think that anyone's entitled to talk about anything. But when the violence goes on to Australian streets, and there's two sides to this violence, obviously, at times, and let me just be honest, it's probably, unfortunately, more one side, and that is radical Islamists. But nonetheless, it appears to me that we've got a very big problem when a conflict that is so far removed from us is playing out on the streets of Australia. And I know that might be something that might be an affront to you, but I totally disagree with the violence that happens about this, particularly on the streets in Australia. And I think it's a sign that we've probably imported a very big problem that isn't our problem. I don't agree with what Israel's doing, but nonetheless, I hate to see it playing out in Australian streets.
I would like to, if you may, Father Dave, I know we have a limited time, but I just want to say that, there's someone pointed out, like, why is this Australia's problem? I think the key is that, unfortunately, this Australian government has made it our problem, because Penny Wong has taken a side, and it's the side of Israel. Like, for example, Australia recognizes the existence of Israel, but unlike the majority of nations around the world, they don't recognize the existence of Palestine. Penny Wong, when there was an incident where a bomb hit the Syrian Golan Heights in a town called Majd al-Shams, and it killed 12 Syrian children. And she went on television, or she went on Twitter, and she claimed that those 12 Syrian children were Israeli. And she said, I condemn the killing of 12 Israeli children when they were Syrian. That's the Australian government taking a side. When you have the Israeli flag being plastered on the Opera House, and then when protesters come to protest that, the Australian, IAJ, like the Australian Jewish Association or whatever it's called, I forget that group, lies and manipulates audio recordings and claims that the protesters said something hateful, and the police are like called to that, and they find out that nothing hateful was actually said. Like the fact that they put an Israeli flag on the Opera House, that's taking a side. And unfortunately, Australia, the government, because it follows so much US foreign policy, and because they have basically in Alice Springs, we allow the US a military base in Alice Springs that gives them satellite information to target people abroad. And Israel is given that information, and they actually kill an Australian citizen that's an aid worker in Gaza. That's Australia being involved. So this is why the protests are happening here. So I think in order to stop any protests from happening here, the key is to stop the Australian government from taking Israel's side, and to stop taking money from very, very large lobby groups. So this is the message I would say. I'm against violence, but even when it was like an 8,000 strong protest in the streets of Sydney, the only person that was arrested was actually a pro-Israel protester that was trying to cause trouble. So, I have things to say about the protests. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the left have basically hijacked the Palestinian movement and tried to gatekeep anyone from the right from entering it, to the detriment of the Palestinian movement. And this is how, unfortunately, the Australian left, particularly Socialist Alternative, they recruit through the Palestinian cause. That's how they make their money, and that's how they perpetuate themselves. It's unfortunate, but unfortunately, I think the Palestinians, they don't. People who are pro-Palestine, they don't really see yet how the right are their natural allies, given that they share conservative values. But I see some change in that. We're trying to work towards that. So thanks, though, for being, someone who's open-minded about that.
Look, Mimi, I think I always say every complex problem has a simple answer, and it's always the wrong answer. And that's true here as well. And I mean, I think even with the Albanese government, I know I'm biased because I like Anthony, but he has said some positive things, at least relative to previous prime ministers and others and other countries. He's come out as being stronger in supporting Palestine than others, but yes, at the same time, not strong enough. And it's a mess. And this is why we pray, I think, as we throw up our hands and say, Lord, what do we do? I mean, the situation in Syria seems so depressing, but we've got to believe there's a light shining in the darkness there. We've got to believe that good things will come. We're just not sure where they're going to come from, but having cleared the stage of human effort, we people of faith believe that God will act. It has to. Justice has to come. And as you say, Mimi, hopefully within our own lifetime, hopefully quickly, soon.
Just think that Israel supporters are the terrorist supporters, unfortunately. And they need to wake up to that. So if you support Israel, please do not pretend to support Syrian Christians. They've been killing Syrian Christians for decades. So I just
and as someone who's been opposed to radical Islam in just about all of its forms for a hell of a long time, proof's there. You can go and have a look at everything that I've said. I can also say that the indiscriminate killing of civilians is also an evil as well. So I'm going to have to go. Father Dave,
we've got to go. We've got to go.
Very soon.
I'm going to play an old favourite video of mine on the way out on Boxes for Peace going around Syria. just for fun, boxing in the streets of Syria. That'll take us out. But thank you, George. Thank you, Mimi. Thank you, everybody who joined in. I'm sorry we couldn't put everybody's questions up on the board and respond to them, but we'll meet again. Let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you so much.